All right. Welcome everyone to the, what is it, February program meeting for the Licking County Computer Society. We have a guest speaker that was kind enough to join us this month. His name is Mark Schulman. He has spent his career as a computer instructor, software designer, and small business owner. He has taught a wide range of programming courses for major corporations and worked on large software development projects. He currently works as the IT manager for a group of family practice physicians. His major geek interest these days is the computer technology that made the moon landings possible in the 1960s. You could do that with your phone probably 10 times. And he lives near Orlando, Florida. He's here to talk about being an IT hero. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks very much. All right. Let me see if I can share my screen.
It's loading. We see it.
All right. And you can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. As John mentioned, my name is Mark Schulman. I've been an IT professional for about 45 years, most of my life. And I usually put a disclaimer at the beginning that I have no affiliation with any product that I'm going to discuss here. But actually, in this case, I do. And I'll point it out to you when we get there. But unless I say otherwise, I have no affiliation with any of the products we're going to discuss. They're just pieces of software and hardware that I use and that I like, and you might be interested in them too. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about my job because it's germane to this topic. So I am the IT guy for a small medical practice, a medical office that's got 4 doctors, and we do some medical research as well. And we've got a total of about 22 people, and I am the only one in the office who has no medical background whatsoever, but I do have computer background, and I'm the IT guy. So what does that mean? Well, it means whenever something's not working or whenever something breaks in terms of computers, or whenever somebody needs some advice on how to do something on the computer, I'm the one that they come to. And that got me thinking about the genesis of this presentation is, it got me thinking about that. And when it comes to friends and family, I'm kind of their IT guy too. And I'll bet most of you are as well. So most of my friends and family, especially the ones that aren't in computers for a living, if they've got questions or they need some sort of help, I'm typically the guy they turn to. And probably for many of you, your friends and family look to you to help keep them safe and help them with any kind of computer problems that they need. So what I'm going to talk about in this presentation is what kind of things can you do to help all your friends and family be prepared for computer problems, and what can you do to come to their rescue if Aunt Millie or Uncle Fred calls you and says, my computer won't turn on. So that's what we're going to discuss in here today. And maybe there'll even be a tip or two that you didn't already know about. But the idea is, how do we organize our knowledge and abilities so that we're there for the people we care about? So the first topic I want to talk about is prevention. And what frequently happens to me is that somebody will call me and say, hey, Mark, I just got a new computer. And they might say something like, is there anything I should do when I'm setting it up, or anything I should know about before I start using this computer? And there are a lot of things that probably most people in this room already know about that we can tell friends and family to prevent problems. And they're the same sort of things that you and I would do on our own computers, but we just never think to tell other people about them. So again, friends and family may look to you to save them from making mistakes. And what kind of advice can you give them? Well, I came up with 6 things that I think I would tell somebody that comes to me and says, how do I set up my computer so that I don't run into problems in the future? And again, I think most of you probably do these things, but you just might not think to tell your friends and family. And here's a nice little checklist for you. So number one, they need to learn the basics, important basics about the computer to keep from getting scammed. And I know everybody here knows these things, but Aunt Millie, Uncle Fred might not know these things. So one of the things I think is really important, and this is to keep from getting scammed, is to understand how URLs work, web addresses, what everybody else would refer to as web addresses. So a novice might look at this and think, oh, I'm on PayPal because it starts with www.paypal.com. But hopefully you guys look at this and you say, wait a minute, that's not a proper PayPal address. And in fact, what country is this coming from?
Russia.
Yeah, it sure is. The .ru. This is a link back to a Russian website. So the people just need to understand that they need to look at the whole address up to the first slash, and that tells them what the website is. And the thing farthest to the right will tell them what type of, typically what country it is if it's 2 letters. And then right before that is what they need to look at. Is this PayPal? Is it CNN? Is it Bank of America? What is it? It's that second thing. I'm sorry, second from the right. In this case, it's just a web provider called WebLink. So this is something that I think most of you would know, but your friends and family may not. And this is how a lot of people get scammed. You and I probably know to look for that little lock symbol in the browser to make sure that we have a secure connection, but friends and family may not. So that's an important piece of advice, I think, to give friends and family. Look for that little lock symbol to make sure that they have a secure connection when they're using their web browser. Okay, so what else? Well, get behind a router. So even if Aunt Millie only has one computer, hooking it directly to the modem for their web provider is not safe. They need to have a router installed. Even if there's only one computer on their network, it still needs to be behind a router. And routers these days, a decent one for a novice is not very expensive, $30 or $40 maybe. Maybe you can get them cheaper than that. But very important, get behind a router. It is the single biggest thing you can do to protect your security. It may be built into the internet service providers' equipment, and it often is these days. I know when our cable company provides internet, the modem they give us now has a router built in. But if it doesn't, then they need to get a router, and it's just about, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's required to keep them safe. So how can you tell if you're behind a router? Well, the easiest way is to open a command prompt and type the command ipconfig. And there's a lot of stuff that comes out here, and you don't need to know everything in it. But where it says IP address, or in this case, IPv4 address, if it starts with 192.168, or it starts with a 10, then you're behind a router and it's safe. If it doesn't, then they really need to get a router. Next is learn password safety. And again, these are the kind of things that you have people harping on you about in these meetings all the time. But if someone is new to computers or is just starting to get more active on the internet, these are really important. So here's some good advice you can give them. First of all, pick good passwords, of course. This is a tough one. Don't use the same password everywhere, especially people that aren't very experienced. They want to pick a really good password and memorize it and use it everywhere. And the problem with this is that if you use this one password for your bank account and you use exactly the same password for somebody's amateur website, then the people with the amateur website may not have very good security. And if somebody breaks into their website, the first thing they're going to try is, well, I'm going to see if Millie has a Bank of America account and use that exact same password on her Bank of America account. And so don't allow that to happen. And don't give passwords to anybody you don't know. And emphasize to your friends and family, your bank will never ask you to give them your password. No reputable company should ever ask you for your password. They know your password, or at least they know the information they need to get into your account. So if a bank or any organization asks for a password, bad idea. Making up good passwords. You and I know what a good password is, but it's really hard for some people sometimes on the spot to think of a good password. So they're staring at a website they're trying to sign up for, and the website is saying, I need you to make up an 8-character password that's got one uppercase, one lowercase, and a digit and a special character. So what do? They use the name of their dogs, they capitalize the first letter, and then they put their street address as the number. And they come up with these really bad passwords because it's actually hard to think of a good password when you're staring at a website. So we can use something called a password generator. And if you've never seen one of those, let me show you what I think is a really good one. And all of these URLs I've got for you in the slides, so you don't need to remember any of these addresses. So here's the password manager or not password manager, password generator that I use. And I can tell it, do I want it to include uppercase letters, lowercase letters, digits, and I can tell it how long I want it to be. So if I say I need 18 characters, it just makes up a password that meets those characteristics. And if I don't like that password, I can just click the refresh and it'll keep generating more and more passwords. So that's what I call a memorable password. An easy type password is a password that's a random mix of characters, but it's got all the uppercase letters first, all the lowercase letters next, then a special character, and then all the digits. So this is almost secure as just a random mix of characters. But when I'm typing it on a tablet or on my phone, constantly shifting up and down is really annoying. So this way I get all the uppercase letters first, and then I get all the lowercase letters. So you give up just a tiny bit of security for it to be easier to type. Then you can have evil passwords, and they are just complete random mixes of characters. And those are the most secure. They're also the hardest to remember. So I really like this. And if you encounter a website that, for example, won't let you put a $sign in the password, you can unclick that button, and then you'll get passwords that don't include a $sign. Now, so I think this is the nicest password generator I've ever seen. Here's the full disclosure. I wrote this. There's no cost for it. It's completely free, completely open, doesn't collect any information, but full disclosure, I actually wrote it. If for some reason that bothers you, then on the slides, there was another alternative. LastPass has got one that you can get to. I don't think it's quite as nice. It's not as flexible, but there's somebody else that offers one. If you just go to Google and do a search on password generator, you'll get 1 million hits. But I wanted to write one that worked exactly the way I wanted it to work. And so that's what you just saw. Okay, storing passwords. I think it's crucial. If you're going to use different passwords everywhere, then you probably should have a password manager. And probably everybody in the room, or most people in the room, use a password manager of one type or another. So all you have to do is remember the master password to get you into your password manager, and your password manager will keep track of all your passwords. I've got 2 that I really like. There's one called Safe in Cloud, and that's what I use at home. At work, we use Bitwarden. Both of those are free, except Safe and Cloud charges for use on Android and iOS, but on a PC or a Mac, it's free. There's other popular ones, 1Password, Dashlane, RoboForm. Most of them have a paid version, but they also have a free version. I don't think 1Password does. Um, every time these days I see um, reviews of password managers, Bitwarden is always one of the top ones listed. So that's the one I would recommend to friends and family there. And they should use something like that to keep track of passwords. Now, missing from the list is LastPass. I do not recommend LastPass anymore. They've had too many security breaches in my mind. I believe they've had two complete security breaches. And as far as I'm concerned, two strikes and you're out. So I don't recommend LastPass. They need to have some way to avoid malware and make sure that they do. Now, this isn't a big deal anymore because Windows actually comes with a fairly decent antivirus built in, and that's Windows Defender. And it's pretty decent. The best advice, I think, is to use a paid antivirus software. At work, we use Norton 360, and I use it at home because they buy me a free copy from at work. So I like it, and it's perfectly adequate. But if I didn't have one, I would just use Windows Defender. I actually think the free versions of antivirus software are probably not up to snuff. I get too much nagging from AVG and from all the other free ones. So if you're determined not to pay for it, then I would just use Windows Defender. I also install Malwarebytes and run it about once a week or once a month, somewhere in there. At work, we run it once a month. At home, I run it once a week, and just let it do a full scan of my disk and make sure that there's no viruses I need to worry about. And you and I know, I'm sure everybody in this room knows about the dangers of opening email attachments, but a lot of novices don't. So if you're giving advice to your friends and family, I think that's probably the most important thing to keep from getting infected is don't open attachments. You can warn friends and family about computer-related scams. You can tell them Microsoft will never call you. That's always a scam. Nobody legitimate will ever ask you for your password. And don't call a phone number if a web page tells you that your computer is infected. And we all know that that's a scam as well. Here's one that's not obvious. Don't assume that someone works where they say they work. And I'll tell you where this came into play for me recently. Someone called me from a credit card company, and it was a credit card that I owned. And they said, we think we have some suspicious activity on your account, and we'd like to verify these transactions with you. And I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, could you give me your credit card number so I can make sure that I'm really talking to Mark Schulman? They said that. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you my credit card company. And we were kind of in an impasse because they called me. I didn't know for certain it was my credit card company. And now they're asking for personal information. So what's the answer to that? I told the woman that I was going to hang up and I would call the number on the back of my card. And how could I get in touch with her once I'd done that? And she gave me her extension. I called customer service for my credit card, entered her extension, and next thing I know, I'm talking to her again. But now I know she really works for the credit card company. Don't just assume that someone that calls you works for the company that they say they work for. Just some bonus scam tips. And I just add these because I was going through my list of common scams. Your grandson is not in a Mexican jail. So if somebody calls you and says, hi, Grandpa, this is your son, and I got arrested in a Mexican jail, it's a scam. And the warranty on your 1998 Toyota Corolla did not just expire. And This one's near and dear to me because my mother-in-law got this call and was really concerned that she was about to lose the warranty on her car. And of course, it was just a scam. They were trying to sell her a worthless extended warranty. So while you're telling them about all the computer scams, you can tell them about a couple of telephone scams as well. Keep a notebook. This is something not very many people do, but I have always done this. Keep a notebook of important information about your computer. Things like registration codes, list of equipment that's hooked up to your computer, passwords. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Logs of important changes. So anytime I install a major update to Windows, I just write it down in my notebook, and warranty information, put it in the notebook. And you'd be surprised how often this turns out to be helpful. So if I'm going to go help somebody and I say, well, when was your computer, when did it last get its Windows updates if a computer won't boot? Well, I don't remember. Well, when did you last hook equipment up to your computer? I don't remember. Do you have your Windows activation code? No. Do you have your Office activation code? No. So they should have a notebook where all this is recorded. And if someone calls me and says, can you come help me set up your computer? The first thing I'm going to do is buy some cheap composition book for $1.99 and write some of this information down and tell them to keep it near the computer. Be surprised how often this turns out to be really helpful. And even a lot of people that have been using computers for years and years don't do anything like this, and they can't find this information if they had to. And you should point out to your friends and family, keep all the CDs and DVDs, if any, that came with their computer and store them in a cool, dark place. And that's another frustration sometimes is I'll say, well, where's your copy of such and such a software? Well, I don't know. I lost the CDs. Okay. And not a lot comes on CDs anymore, but if they do get CDs, that's still useful information. So a little bit of contrarian advice here. We talked about passwords, and I said the best way to keep track of them is with a password manager. But if you can't get your friends and family to do that, at least get them to write them down in this notebook. And I actually think that's okay, because if someone breaks into your house, they're not going to go looking for your computer notebook. So this is actually pretty safe. It's not a bad place to keep track of your passwords if you can't be bothered to use a password manager. So I can't tell you how many times I've had relatives that call me and say, I've lost my password for such and such. And they just made it up on the spur of the moment and didn't write it down anywhere. And now they've forgotten it and they can't get into some website. And they might lose their email account or other things can happen. Forgetting passwords is never a good idea. You should never assume that you'll be able to recover your password. So if you can't talk them into using a password manager, writing them down in this notebook is a good alternative. And by the way, a lot of people will fight me on that one, but I believe it's okay. And number 6, and probably the most important, is convince them to make backups. And all hard drives will eventually fail. And I've talked about this in other presentations. There were some tests performed by a company called Backblaze, and they actually do this test every year. And Backblaze is a backup service. We're going to talk about it in a minute. It's a data center that at the time, at the copy I got, they had 41,000 hard drives. And what they found was some models of hard drive had as high as a 26% annual failure rate, which means that if you use that computer for 4 years, you're just living on borrowed time if you have one of those makes and models and it hasn't failed. And you can get a copy of the report at that link right there. And again, I'll give you the slides so you don't have to write that down. So hard drives can fail, but there are lots of other ways you can lose your data as well. the computer itself can fail and computer can catch on fire. That happens sometimes. Maybe there's nothing wrong with your hard disk until it got roasted by your computer. You can accidentally delete stuff. Your computer, especially if it's a laptop, can be lost or stolen. You can have fire or flood. I'm sitting here in Florida. It's really rainy right now, and we get floods all the time. Fortunately, I haven't experienced one in decades, but it happens around here all the time. And finally, you can get malware that just wipes out your entire hard drive. So I saw this quote someplace, and I'm sorry I don't remember where I got it, but I love this quote. If you don't make backups, you don't own your files. You're just borrowing them from fate. If you work with computers enough and you do it for long enough, you're eventually going to get to a point where your backup is your only hope for getting your files back. So convince people, your friends and family, they need to be doing backups. The ideal backup is something that's convenient, reliable, secure, inexpensive, and this is the important one. It needs to be off-site, or at least a copy of your files needs to be off-site. What do I mean by that? Well, if your computer catches on fire and your backup is sitting on a shelf above your computer, then you're going to lose your backup as well. So there needs to be a backup stored someplace else other than your house, so that if your house burns to the ground, at least you can get your files back. And I've said this before in different presentations. If my house burned to the ground and I knew the people were safe and my cat was safe, beyond that, my big concern is, do I have a copy of all my files? Because those files include photographs that go back literally centuries. I didn't take all of those, but the photos that I've taken that go back decades, and I don't want to lose those. I've got recordings of people that aren't around anymore and can't be replaced. And so I really want to know that if my house burns to the ground, once the people and animals are safe, that my files are safe too. What I do is I make a copy of all of my files every week, take it to work, and throw it in my desk drawer at work. And that way I know if my house burns to the ground, at work is a copy of all my files. But that's more trouble than you can typically talk novices into doing. So for me, the ideal solution is an online backup service. Now, these are not free, but they're not terribly expensive. So what they do is they install software on your PC that watches for files to change. And anytime anything changes on the computer, a copy of it gets uploaded to their servers and their disk drives on the internet. And all your data is encrypted, so you don't have to worry about their employees getting into your data or the data being revealed as it's being transmitted over the internet. The advantages are it's a simple, effective, idiot-proof, and inexpensive way to back up your files, and you don't have to do anything. You just install the software and pretty much set it and forget it, and just you can be comfortable knowing that your files are being backed up. The disadvantages is it's not free. And if you ever do need to get your files restored, that can take days, literally, because you have to download all of your stuff from the internet. But to me, those are very minor disadvantages. Some services that I like, or I'm sorry, the major players, I'll tell you which ones I like in just a second. iDrive, Backblaze, CrashPlan, and Carbonite. And this little chart shows for each of these services how many computers you can back up with one subscription and how much data you can store. And usually it's one computer, but they'll back up the entire computer. iDrive is unique. They'll let you back up as many computers as you want, but it can't total more than 5 terabytes of data. And the prices are there. So which ones do I like? Well, I really, really like CrashPlan. But CrashPlan decided that they were going to get out of the consumer market and they're focused strictly on businesses now. And that's why they're the most expensive. You can still use them if you're a consumer, but they are the priciest one here. If I weren't using CrashPlan, I would probably go with Backblaze. And in fact, I'm with iDrive right now, and I have it on my back of my mind to switch to Backblaze. Um, that's probably the one I would recommend. And they're moderately priced at just $70 per year. So for me, for a novice, this is real cheap insurance to make sure that their files are always backed up. Okay, so that's the advice and the help that I would give someone who had just bought a new computer or had just come to me and said, what should I be doing to make sure that I don't have catastrophe? But what if a catastrophe happens? You may be the one coming to the rescue. So many of us are the first line customer service for our friends and family. We're the ones they call when they have a problem. So be prepared to help. So if you've got friends and family and you know they're going to call you if they have a problem, what can you do? Well, one of the things I do is I keep a notebook of their information. I've got a little notebook where I write down for the people that I think might call me to help, including the 22 people at work. I have a place where I can record their make and model of computer, what version of Windows they're running, when they purchased the computer, information about their network, like who their ISP is and what the phone number for the ISP is, whether they're wireless or whether they use hardwired connections, and what the password for their router is, and any other information I can think of. And when I'm over there visiting this person, it just takes me a couple of minutes to write all this information down. But it's really useful when I get a phone call from my mother-in-law or somebody like that, and she says, I can't get on the internet. Some of this information is really helpful to have. So just a little bit of preparation in advance makes it really easy to help them. The other thing I do, and this is not just for computers, but for any kind of electronic equipment that I know they might depend on me for. So my mother, for example, who's in an assisted living facility, I do this for her. My mother-in-law, I do this for her. And a lot of friends and family. I take photos of their equipment. So my mother calls me all the time and says, I've gotten the TV into some weird mode and I don't know how to get out of it. Well, if you don't know what their remote control looks like, it's almost impossible to help them. So I've got a photo that I took of her remote control, and I've got a photo of her TV, front and back. And so if she has a question, if I can see the TV or I can see the remote, helping them is usually really easy. So here's another thing that's really easy to do if you just think ahead. The next time you're over at a relative's house or a friend's house and you know they would call you if they have trouble with their TV or their audio equipment or their DVD player or something that you could help them with, take a picture of the front and back of the unit and just store it on your computer someplace. So when they call for help, you're not asking, well, is there a jack on the machine that's labeled such and such? You can just say, third jack from the right and second row, there's a yellow colored port. I want you to plug it in there or whatever. So you can give them much better advice if you can see what it is they're dealing with. When catastrophe strikes, what can you do to lend assistance to them? Well, I've got some really slick tools that I'm going to show you. And the first one, and I love this, I've used it so many times to help people, is called the Problem Steps Recorder, or just Steps Recorder. It's a program that's built into Windows 10 and 11, and almost nobody knows about it, but it's really, really useful. So what it enables you to do, have you ever been on a phone call with somebody and you're trying to give them help and you say, okay, well, click on this link. And then what does it say? And they're trying to say, well, there's a blue icon and you can't see what they're doing. What Problem Step Recorder does is you can say, okay, I want you to do whatever's not working. And Problem Step Recorder will take screenshots and record everything they do. And then they can send that to you. And let me show you what it looks like. I think it's really cool. So to run it, you just go to the Windows Start menu and just type PSR for Problem Steps Recorder and run it. Excuse me, this is what they do. This is what you tell them to do. So it just throws up a little bitty window here, and you'd click on Start Record. And then you tell them to do whatever it was that wasn't working. So they might say, well, I was trying to download a piece of software, and I went to softronics.com, which is a place to get freeware and shareware. Uh-oh. Did I do that right? Well, this may not work. I was having trouble with let's just do a Google search for it. There it is. Okay. And they were looking for a program called Rufus, which we're going to discuss more in just a minute. And it can't find it. Am I on the right website? Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. All right. Well, you know what? We're gonna go ahead and run with this because they might say, I tried to go to Softronics and it wasn't working. What am I doing wrong? So now they hit stop record. And here's everything they just did. And you can see it's got screenshots and it tells you everything they typed, everything they clicked on, and every time they did something, it took a screenshot of what was on their computer. So there's everything I just did with screenshots of everything. So I don't know why I wound up on the wrong website, but I could now take this and figure it out. And so they can now click save, and they can save it as a file someplace, as a zip file. I'll just call it problem.zip. And they could email that to you. So right now on my desktop, I've got this thing called problem.zip. And when I get this, I can open that file and see what they had just seen. I think you have to open it in Edge. Oh, come on. No. Oh, God. Well, okay, I'm not going to do this. I would see what they had just seen on their screen. I've never used Edge on this computer. It wants me to do a setup. I'm not doing it. So what I just showed you a minute ago, where it had all of those screenshots and it had a list of everything they had done, that's what I would see if I open this in Edge. So Problem Screen Recorder is just great. I really like it, and it's allowed me to help quite a few people. Okay, so we just did the demo. Okay, but nothing good lasts forever. I've got an example here of how Microsoft is looking out for us, and I just found this morning. So in an announcement, Microsoft said, as part of our ongoing commitment to enhance and innovate the Windows experience. Okay, that sounds exciting, because whenever Microsoft says that, it means something good is coming, right? In future Windows 11 updates in early 2024, Problem Step Recorder will be deprecated. Oh no. Part of our plan to streamline our offerings, focus on providing more advanced tools, blah, blah, blah. So Microsoft provided us with something really cool, and now they're going to take it away from us. So my guess is it's in every version of Windows 10. It's in every current version of Windows 11. And my guess is it will be out there for the rest of the lifetime of Windows 11. But just a warning, at some point, Microsoft's going to get rid of it. And I can't tell you how furious I was this morning when I found that out. So, oh God. An alternative to that is to do screen sharing. And my favorite place to do that is Show My PC. They're still free. And unlike TeamViewer and some of the others that now force you to pay for it, Show My PC is currently still free. So what that enables you to do is to actually, if you get them to go to Show My PC, and I'm not going to do a demo of this. It takes two different PCs and it's a little long, but it will allow you to watch them do something on their PC or for you to guide them through some process. So this is a great alternative to the problem recorder, the steps recorder, to be able to actually see their PC. And Zoom works really good too. So you can always, if you've got a Zoom account, a free Zoom account, you can establish a Zoom meeting with them and get them to share their screen and you can watch what they do. So sharing their screen is a really good alternative as well. All right. Well, what if the worst happens? Catastrophe. There's all kinds of things that could go wrong. What if somebody calls you and says they've got a hard disk failure, or they've got a malware infection, or Windows won't boot, or maybe the machine just won't turn on at all? They hit the power button and nothing happens. So what can you do? Well, a great tool for you to have in your toolbox is a flash drive with Hiren's Boot CD on it. This is an old tool, but it was recently acquired by a group of people that have greatly improved it over what it used to be. And what it enables you to do is you can pop it into a USB port of a computer that won't boot, and you can boot from this flash drive, and it gives you all sorts of tools that you can use to diagnose PC problems and potentially repair them. And let me show you what that looks like. So to make one of these flash drives, you need a flash drive with at least 4 gigabytes of space. That's a pretty small flash drive, so those are easy to come by. And you need to download 2 pieces of software. And I've got these on the slides at the end, so you don't need to write this down. But the 2 things you need to download are Hiren's Boot CD, what they call an ISO, and I'll give you the website for that in a minute. And you need to download a program called Rufus. And what Rufus does is take an ISO and put it on the flash drive such that you can boot from the flash drive. So these are the 2 things you need to download. And the way you make one of these flash drives, I've got the flash drive, a blank flash drive plugged into my computer. And I run Rufus. And I get a screen that looks like this. And it's already selected the flash drive here. And I need to tell it where the ISO is that I want to put on the flash drive. So I click select and select that ISO that I downloaded. I'm going to change the partition scheme. Again, you don't have to write this down. I've got it for you. Change it to MBR. And then I just click start. And it's going to warn me that it's going to erase that flash drive if there's anything on it that I thought I needed. And then it will take it several minutes to make the flash drive. So I'm not actually going to do it. I've already done it. But I would just hit OK and sit back and wait a few minutes and it would do that. So what does it look like once you've got the flash drive? Well, what you can do, plug it into the USB port on any computer, boot from that flash drive, and you get something that looks like this. Now, I know if you're there in the room, you probably can't read much of this, but it looks just like Windows 11, although it's kind of got some Windows 7 features built in. But I actually have a functioning version of Windows here. This is not using the version of Windows that's actually running on my computer. It's using its own version of Windows. And I can start one of the web browsers. I can go to some website. And just that right there, if you've got a computer that's not working, just being able to boot into Windows and bring up a browser and do some Google searches can be really, really helpful. And it's much easier than using your phone. But more importantly, Hirons comes loaded with lots and lots of utilities. And there's accessories like Notepad. There's all the administrative tools like computer management is in there. We can look in there. Control panel is in there. Device manager, disk management. There's hard disk tools to fix hard disks, to partition them. There's things to manage your network. There's security stuff here, which is really useful. There's an antivirus program right here. So if I've got a hard drive that's infected and I can't boot the hard drive because of a virus, I've got a virus scanner right here, 2 of them, that I can run to try to get that hard drive cleaned off. So there's all kinds of tools here. Some of them will be very familiar to you. There's partition software. So if you've used any of these utilities, they might be familiar to them, but we could do a presentation on each one of these utilities. So I'm not going to do that here. But the idea is if you can't get a computer to boot into Windows, you've got a flash drive that's got Windows on it ready to be booted for, or ready to be booted into. So big fan of Hirons CD, really useful. And the more utilities on it you learn, the better off you'll be, and the more you'll be able to help. So I've got a couple slides here that are just instructions on exactly how to build these flash drives. So if you get a copy of the slides, the instructions are right there. Important notes about Hirons Boot CD. Be sure you get what's called the PE version. There's some older versions that don't have the PE after them. They're not what you want. And make the flash drive now. Don't wait for a catastrophe, because if it's your computer that goes south, you may not be able to make one of these flash drives on your computer when you actually need one. So what I recommend, if you think you might need it for yourself or for friends, take half an hour on a weekend day and make yourself one of these flash drives and put it away someplace so that you've got it if you ever need it. Another great tool, you can get these off Amazon, and if you do a search for USB hard drive adapter, you'll see a million of them, and they can be very inexpensive, $10 or $15. And what they enable you to do, you can take the hard drive out of a computer and plug the big thing there into the end of the hard drive, and then plug the USB adapter into a working computer, and you'll be able to see everything on the hard drive, and you'll be able to browse through it just like it were a flash drive or an external hard drive. This is really useful if someone's computer completely breaks and it's just toast, but the hard drive is still good. You can pull the hard drive out of it, use one of these adapters, plug it into your computer, and then you can go get all their files and put them on a flash drive or an external drive for them or whatever they need, but it'll allow you to browse through their hard drive and get their data off of it. It's also really nice if someone came to me and said, my computer's got a virus and I need it cleaned. What I would do is I would pull their hard drive out, use one of these connectors so I could hook their hard drive up to my computer, and then I would use my antivirus software to go scan that hard drive. And I'll tell you why in just a minute, but that's the safest way to try to recover a hard drive that's been infected. So some things to do if someone says they've got a hard drive failure, that's a very common thing to happen. Use your USB hard drive adapter that we just looked at to try to get their files off that drive. You can try to reinstall or replace the drive. You can try reinstalling Windows if it won't boot from the hard drive. If they had a virus infection, say ransomware, and you think you've got it cleaned off or you've reinstalled Windows, then this would allow you, your next step would be to replace their files from a backup. So let's talk about malware infection. Suppose somebody comes to you and says, my computer's been infected. What can you do for them? Well, here's an interesting question. What do you suppose most people do when they get a virus infection on their computer?
Shut it off.
Okay, that's the immediate thing they do. What do they do over the next day or two?
Start searching the internet for ways to remove it.
Actually not. Believe it or not, what the vast majority of people do is go buy a new computer. And believe it or not, that is what most people do when they get a serious infection because they don't know what else to do. And if they do try to Google it, they get something that's too complicated for them to understand. So what I'm hoping is that if one of your friends or family gets an infection, they won't go buy a new computer. They'll come to you and say, help me. Here's an important thing to remember. You can never really trust a computer once it's been infected. You can't trust it to clean itself. So if they have Norton, let's say, installed on their computer and they get infected, if you run Norton and Norton goes through and says, okay, your computer's no longer infected, I would not trust it because a lot of viruses know about antivirus programs. And the first thing they do when they infect a computer is they screw up the antivirus system so that if you run the antivirus system, it won't be able to properly clean the infection. So as far as I'm concerned, you can try to clean the infection, but I would never really trust it again. If I got infected, I would reinstall Windows. So you can try to use the USB adapter to, okay, now this part is safe. What I just described, if you take the hard drive out of their computer and you hook it to your computer, which is not infected, and you use your antivirus system to clean that hard drive, you do a scan on that hard drive and it finds the infection and cleans it off, I would feel safe about that. You can go to your antivirus service and you can download, they'll all have what they call a rescue disk, and it will allow you to create a flash drive or a CD that you can boot from and then let that clean off the system. That's also safe. The Hiren's Boot CD that we just talked about has got antivirus scanners on it. If they come up and say they've cleaned the infection, that's probably safe. I would double check it by running Malwarebytes just to make sure that it's got everything off of it. And if you want even a third opinion, you can go to housecall.trendmicro.com. They have a antivirus that they call Housecall that you don't have to install. You can just run it and it will go through and check for infections. And I've used that a couple times just to make sure. The last thing I would do, if they have any installation, software installation files that they have downloaded onto their computer, I would assume those are infected and I would go to the websites and re-download them. So if they had gone to, I don't know, Firefox and they had the installation program for Firefox sitting on their computer, I would delete it and then go back out to firefox.com and download a fresh copy just to make sure that I have one that's not infected. An important thing to remember is that no antivirus program catches everything. And therefore, getting these second and third opinions, running Malwarebytes, using Housecall can really be effective to make sure you really did get it completely cleaned. And reinstalling is usually the safest solution. So if someone gets a really bad infection, if I possibly can, my preference, even though it's the longest, hardest thing to do, would be to completely reinstall Windows. And then you know that the infection is gone. Whether you're willing to go to that kind of trouble, you can decide. If Windows gets corrupted, there's a bunch of things you can try here, but first thing I would try is to restore. Hopefully, their computer is capturing what they call restore points, and you can Google this if it comes up, but you can tell their computer to go back to a previous restore point, and that will frequently fix a lot of problems, especially problems caused by Windows updates. If there's a hard drive problem or if some of the Windows files have gotten corrupted, you can use that command there. Open a command prompt and type sfc/scan now, and there's a space between those two things, and that will fix a lot of problems. Try installing Windows or try going to the Windows installation and using the repair option. So if you have an installation file or an installation CD for Windows, there's usually an option to repair it. You can restore an image if you use one of the online backup services. One of the things you can ask them to do is to restore Windows. And you may lose whatever software you've installed over the past 24 hours, if any, but it's usually a good solution. And finally, if nothing else will work, download a fresh copy of Windows 10 and just reinstall everything. And that's a big pain, but that's the final option. Finally, what if their computer won't turn on at all? The most common reason that a computer won't turn on at all is that the power supply has gone bad. These are easily replaceable. You can get them from Amazon, Best Buy, or any local computer shop. Make sure that it's a power supply that will work with your computer, and pick one that has a wattage that's as high or higher than your computer's existing power supply. So if you've got a 500-watt power supply, then you can use a 600 or 700 or 800-watt power supply, but it needs to be at least 500 or whatever you've currently got. So reinstalling a power supply or installing a new power supply is probably one of the easier things to do if you've never done computer maintenance. If you're at all handy with a screwdriver, you can probably manage to install a new power supply. So obviously, I'm not going to demonstrate here. It's a half-hour long process, but that's something that you could consider, or you can take it to a computer shop and just get them to replace the power supply. So that's typically when a computer won't turn on at all. That's almost always what the problem is. A few odds and ends. Warn friends and family about a couple of risks that may not be obvious. One of them is repair services. There have been a number of times where people have taken computers into Best Buy or the local computer shop or whatever with something that wasn't working, and an employee at that computer shop has fished data off the computer. I wouldn't take a computer in unless I knew if you've got any photos you wouldn't want anybody else to see, or videos you wouldn't want anybody else to see, or financial data you wouldn't want anybody to see. I would not take my computer in for repair unless I was sure those were off the computer. If you think that the hard drive is not the problem, if you think like the power supply has gone out or something like that, one of the things you can do is open the case and pull the power supply out. I'm sorry, not the hard drive out, and take the rest of the computer in and get them to fix whatever's wrong with it. If they need to replace a power supply or a DVD drive or something like that, they don't need your hard disk to be in it. So I would give some thought to that. The other thing you need to be careful of, if you're giving a computer away, you need to make sure that the hard drive is wiped out. And a great program to do that is called DBAN, and that stands for Derek's Book and Newt. Boot and Nuke. And what that program does is it thoroughly erases the hard drive so that nobody will ever be able to get anything off of it. So I would do that before I ever gave a computer away. And we actually ran into this in the office. We had some old computers that we were going to turn over to give to employees or give away to other people. And the very first thing we did is run this program to make sure that any medical data that might have been on those computers was wiped out. If you're giving it to somebody that's going to expect Windows to be on it, then you can just go download a copy of Windows 10 and just spend half an hour reinstalling it. And that way they've got a nice, fresh computer that's got Windows 10 on it. And the last thing, it's a completely different point. Don't be afraid to cut someone off. If you give somebody all this good advice, if you tell them, do a backup and keep a notebook of things that happen to the computer, and you tell them all these things to do, get an antivirus, and they just won't follow your advice, then you have to be ready that when they come to you and say, I didn't do anything you told me to do, and now my computer's not working, you have to be willing to say, well, you didn't do what I told you to do, so I can't help you. Now, if that's your mother, that's pretty hard to do. But if it's a friend, you may just have to say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to take it to somebody else and get them to look at it. So there are the addresses of everything I've talked about in this presentation and where you can go to get this stuff. And that's it. If you have any questions in the future, there's my email address. You're welcome to email me anytime. And are there any questions at the moment?
I have a couple questions. I'm the guy running the machine here, by the way. You talked about earlier on about the getting a router if you don't have one. And what is it about a router that makes your system secure?
Okay, so a router does something called network address translation. And what it does is the really important thing, it keeps any computer on the internet from being able to directly get to your computer uninvited. And the routers are very effective at that. And so if you hook your computer up directly to the internet, then really any computer that I guarantee you, within minutes of you connecting the computer directly to the internet, other computers will have discovered you're there. And if there's any unaddressed vulnerability in Windows, they'll be able to break into your computer. A router keeps them from being able to connect to your computer.
Isn't that called a firewall?
It functions as a firewall, but firewalls are on top of that. First of all, the router probably contains a firewall, but the router prevents the request to connect to you from even getting to your computer. So if there's some bug in the firewall that it's not working correctly, or if there's some bug in Windows that the firewall is not running correctly, if there's a router between you and the internet, the request won't even be able to get to your computer. So it's a little different from a firewall, but it's kind of the same idea.
Okay. Now, the other thing you were talking about, you got the call from this, the bank or whatever about your credit card.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a scam that was going around. I don't know if it's still possible to do that now, but the idea is the crook gets an application for on his cell phone that allows him to mimic making a telephone call to somewhere. So they call you, and just like this lady did, and they tell you to hang up and immediately pick up your phone and call this number, and to verify that I'm who I say I am. Well, what they do, you hang up, but they don't hang up.
Yep.
There's a few seconds of delay there between the telephone system disconnecting the call. So if you pick up your phone quickly enough, they mimic dial tone and they hear you dial the number. They mimic a ringback tone and they answer, and sure enough, it's the person that they say they are. Now, I don't know if that's been addressed or not, but that reminded me of that.
Yeah, so that only worked on landlines. So on a cell phone, when you hang up, the call's been disconnected. So that's probably, if you've got an old style landline, then that's probably something I'd be aware of. That's a good tip. If you just use your cell phone to make the call to the company, you won't have any problem.
That's a good point. Yeah, that most people do have. If they have a landline, they usually have a cell phone too. So you
Yeah.
use a cell phone to do that. Okay.
Yep.
So I
That's it. I hadn't thought about that one in a long time. That's a good tip.
Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat. I'm gonna look at those and see if any of those have not been answered yet.
Okay.
I had one. How do you feel about the password manager that's built into Google Chrome? Any opinion on it?
So I worry about that a little bit. It's because it's such a big target. I don't know that there's been any breaches on it, but I also worry about Google potentially, not revealing any passwords. I don't think Google will do anything illegal, but I do worry about them looking through the passwords I've stored just to get personal information. Okay, so this guy's got logins to a bunch of baby sites. He must have just had a baby or something like that. So I can tell you at work, we disable the password manager that comes in Chrome and we use Bitwarden. And by the way, I think the same thing about Firefox and all the other browser built-in password managers.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the other chat history to see if there's any other questions that haven't been covered. I think that's all we had in the chat.
Okay.
We have one local here, Mr. Mike Fleming.
What about switching to Linux?
That's an open-ended
opinion?
question.
Okay.
It's a loaded question from a Linux fanboy.
Well,
I'm one too.
yeah, listen, I started out in Unix, so I'm a big Linux fan. So what was the question? I didn't hear it.
He said, what about Linux?
Oh, what about Linux? Well, I think a lot of the advice that I gave still works for Linux. Obviously, some of the specific tools are not going to be the same, but and maybe the antivirus isn't quite as important. But if if your grandmother decided to run Linux, then I would still say she needs a backup. She needs keep a notebook. She needs to keep track of the passwords. So I think probably 80% of the advice here still applies to a Linux user.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
My mother-in-law, by the way, is a Mac user. And she was one of the people I was thinking about as I put this presentation together. So, a lot of what we covered in here certainly works for a Mac user. And Mac and Linux, have a similar architecture. So a lot of the same stuff.
What do you have to say to that, Mike?
I see his point. Yeah, you got it covered.
But it was a Windows-centric presentation.
It was. I mean, most of our members are on Windows, as you probably guessed. But yeah, I agree. Those are very useful tips for any operating system.
Yeah, I think so.
Mark, that's because Windows is the one that's going to have to be fixed the most.
Yeah,
I think you are exactly right.
Yep. Some of us make careers out of fixing Windows.
At work, we're mostly a Windows shop, but we've got 2 Linux servers. And I can't remember the last time we rebooted them. So they just run. Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, I understand. But, for a lot of people, the desktop stuff that they really want isn't there, and Windows is a friendlier environment. So you got to work harder for it, but that's the feeling that's out there anyway.
Yeah, I would say Windows is definitely friendlier to people that are used to Windows, and it's what people are familiar with. And a lot of people, don't want change, don't want to learn a new thing if they don't have to.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, either online or here in the studio? Well, yeah,
All right.
thank you, Mark, for the great presentation. Very, very informational. A lot of good tips there. And
Thank you.
we'll find someone to share your presentation with the rest of the group. If you want to send it to me, I can make sure it gets shared internally with the people that are on here.
I will do that.
He sends it to me. I do all the club mailings, and I'll do it in an email. I can
Thanks,
even
Ken.
post it on our website.
Thanks, John. Didn't mean to call you
Yeah.
Ken, sorry.
I'll send copies to both of you. You can decide what to do with it.
Well, John will do it. John's the man. All right.
Okay.
One announcement before we stop the recording is that our next program meeting is going to be March 17th. We have a custom topic that was suggested by one of our members. I think it might have been Ira. We're going to be talking about the versatility of smartphones, and that's going to be presented by yours truly. I haven't started preparing for it yet, but I've got a full month to go. So, all right. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again, Mark.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Mark.
Okay, if you're gonna stick around and get the drawing stuff, I'm gonna stop the recording.
Yep, Everett's going to stop the recording, and we're going to remain here for the drawing.